Almost all of us have asked ourselves this question at least once. What would we do if we woke up one morning and discovered we'd just won millions of dollars? Maybe we'd quit our jobs on the spot, buy the house we've always dreamed of, travel around the world, purchase a home for our parents, pay off our family's debts, and finally live without worrying about the future. Because for most people, winning the lottery is the end of all financial problems. After all, how could someone have $22 million and still lose everything? David Reynolds believed exactly that. He wasn't a bad man. He wasn't greedy. He wasn't reckless with money. He was just an ordinary person with ordinary dreams. A man whose life was changed forever by a single lottery ticket. But 5 years later, almost nothing remained of that dream. So the real question isn't, what would you buy if you won the lottery? The real question is, if you suddenly became wealthy, would you actually know how to protect it? Tonight, on Money Court, we examine the case of a man who won $22 million and discovered that sometimes the greatest dream of your life can become the beginning of your greatest mistake. Court is now in session. Before we talk about $22 million, we need to talk about the man who won it. His name was David Reynolds, 41 years old, not a professional investor, not a financial genius, not a self-made billionaire. He was just an ordinary man, living an ordinary life. He worked in maintenance. He left home early every morning, worked long hours, and like millions of other Americans, he had bills that needed to be paid. He loved his wife, Emily. He had 2 children who meant everything to him. He didn't dream of luxury. He simply wanted to provide a good life for his family, a safe home, an occasional vacation, and a better future for his kids. His friends described him as responsible. His coworkers said he was someone you could count on. He wasn't a gambler. He wasn't reckless. And he wasn't the kind of person who spent money without thinking. If you had passed him on the street that day, you probably never would have imagined that he was about to receive a fortune beyond what most people could even comprehend. $22 million. But perhaps that's the most important detail in this entire case. David wasn't a bad person. He wasn't foolish either. He simply wasn't prepared for the one thing he had wished for his entire life. Because sometimes the most dangerous day of your life isn't your worst day. It's your best one. The day everything changes. The day you believe all your problems are finally over. And that is exactly when the real case begins. For David Reynolds, that day arrived sooner than he ever expected. It all began on a completely ordinary night. The sky didn't split open. There was no sign of a miracle. No one knew that a family's life was about to change forever. David had just returned home after a long day at work. He left his shoes by the door, changed out of his work clothes, and like hundreds of nights before, sat down on the couch. The lottery ticket was still lying on the table. A cheap ticket he had bought almost out of habit. No expectations, no real hope, just a simple thought. Maybe this time, I'll get lucky. The first number was announced. David looked down at the ticket. A match. The second number, another match. He sat up a little straighter. The third number, correct. The fourth, correct. Now he wasn't smiling anymore. His heart was beating faster. The fifth number, correct. And suddenly, the room fell silent. Every sound around him seemed to disappear. Only one number remained. Final number. The number that could change everything, or change nothing at all. The host announced it. David looked at the ticket again. Then again, and again. He could barely breathe. His hands were shaking. And then, for the first time in his life, he realized that the impossible had become possible. The ticket slipped from his hand. He had won $22 million. $22 million. Emily, he called out, his voice trembling. I think we won. At first, she laughed. Nobody takes news like that seriously. Not in the first few seconds. But when she saw the ticket, when she checked the numbers, when she counted them again and again, the laughter turned into disbelief, and disbelief turned into tears. That night, their small home was filled with crying, laughter, and shouts of joy. The children didn't fully understand what had happened. They only knew that their parents looked like the happiest people in the world. And maybe they were, because in that moment, David Reynolds truly believed that every financial worry in his life was over. No more stress over bills, no more fear about the future, no more anxiety, just freedom, just opportunity, just dreams. But what David didn't know was this: winning the lottery is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's only the beginning of a test that no one is prepared to face. During the first few months, everything unfolded exactly the way most people would expect. There was no disaster, no reckless decisions. No one was throwing money out the window. In fact, David and his family were simply building the life they had always dreamed of. The first decision was the house they had talked about for years. Bigger, safer, in a better neighborhood, a place where their children could attend great school and where the family could build a brighter future. The price was high, but when you have $22 million sitting in your bank account, numbers don't seem nearly as intimidating. So the papers were signed, the keys were handed over, and the Reynolds family moved into their dream home. A few months later came the cars. Not one, but 2 brand new vehicles. A luxury SUV for Emily and the sports car David had dreamed about for years. Was that unreasonable? Maybe not. Most people in his position would have done exactly the same thing. And that's what makes this case so dangerous. The biggest mistakes rarely look like mistakes at all. Then came the travel. For the first time in his life, David booked trips without checking ticket prices. Paris, Rome, Hawaii, the Caribbean. Every year, the vacations became a little bigger, a little more luxurious, and and a little more expensive. And why shouldn't they? He had won. He had worked hard. He had earned this life. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. But the real change was happening somewhere else. The phone calls started. The messages started. The requests started. Old friends, distant relatives, people he hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone appeared. Everyone had a story. Everyone needed help. Everyone saw an opportunity, and David didn't know how to say no. At first, the amounts were small. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. Nothing significant. At least not compared to $22 million, right? But that's the problem with large amounts of money. The human mind adjusts to them. The numbers start to feel smaller. The expenses start to feel more reasonable, and the boundaries slowly begin to disappear. By the end of the first year, life looked incredible. A better house, better cars, more travel, more friends, more opportunities, and a bank account that still held millions of dollars. If you had asked David then whether he was worried about the future, he probably would have laughed, because from his perspective, everything was under control. But what David failed to see wasn't that the money was disappearing. It was that the cost of his new lifestyle was growing larger every single day. And soon, that new life would begin demanding its true price. By the end of the first year, everything looked perfect. The dream house was there. The dream cars were there. The vacations continued. And there were still millions of dollars sitting in the bank account. If someone had told David back then that he would one day worry about money again, he probably would have laughed. From his perspective, $22 million was simply too much money to run out of. But fortunes rarely disappear the way people imagine. They don't vanish overnight. They leak away slowly. A small expense here, a bill there, taxes nobody really thought about, fees that barely seemed noticeable, maintenance costs that returned month after month. The mansion wasn't just a house. It needed upkeep. It needed landscapers. It had a swimming pool. It required insurance. It came with annual property taxes. And every month, it consumed more money. The luxury cars did the same. The vacations did the same. David's new life was like a massive engine, and that engine required more fuel to keep running. But the most dangerous part was that David no longer noticed the spending. $5,000 didn't feel like a lot anymore. $10,000 seemed insignificant. $20,000, once shocking, had become just another number on a screen. And just as the expenses were growing, opportunities seemed to be growing too. Or at least, that's how it appeared. An old friend arrived with an investment opportunity. Incredible return, minimal risk, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Then another proposal appeared, and another, and another. David had always considered himself a smart man, but the problem was that he had never learned how to protect wealth. He had only learned how to earn money, and those are not the same skill. Many people know how to make an income. Far fewer know how to preserve a fortune. Then came the second year, and for the first time, something caught David's attention. His account balance was lower than he expected. Not low enough to cause panic, but low enough to make him pause. Low enough to ask himself, "That's strange, isn't it?" He reviewed the numbers again. Everything seemed reasonable. There were no outrageous purchases, no catastrophic mistakes, just hundreds of small decisions that had quietly piled up over time. And that's exactly what made this case so dangerous. David wasn't the victim of one massive mistake. He was the victim of thousands of tiny ones. Decisions that seemed perfectly reasonable on their own, but together worked like invisible termites. Slow, silent, and relentless. At that point, David still believed everything was under control. But what he didn't realize was that the real problem had not arrived yet. Because soon, something would happen that would destroy every assumption he had made. And for the first time, he would be forced to confront a terrifying question. If no more money enters the account, how long can this life actually survive? Year 3 began with a question David had spent months avoiding. How much money was actually left? Until that moment, he had deliberately avoided looking at the full picture. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't see a reason to. The house was still there. The cars were still there. The vacations were still happening. And there were still millions of dollars spread across different accounts. Everything seemed normal. But one evening, sitting alone in his home office, he decided to put everything together. Every bank account, every investment, every asset, and every debt. For the first time, he wanted to see the complete picture. A few minutes later, something happened that he would never forget. He stared at the screen, ran the numbers again. Then again, the numbers weren't wrong, but he couldn't believe them. Of the $22 million he had won, less than half remained. Not after 10 years, not after 20 years. After only a few years, his heart began to race. Suddenly, every purchase, every favor, every investment, and every small decision came flooding back into his mind. For the first time, he started adding everything up. The house, the cars, the vacations, the taxes, the money given to friends, the loans that were never repaid, and the investments that never produced returns. And suddenly, the numbers made sense. But the worst part was still ahead. Some of the money hadn't been spent at all. It had simply disappeared. One investment project had failed. A business that was supposed to succeed had gone bankrupt. A friend who promised to pay him back no longer answered his calls. An advisor who had promised a bright future had vanished. And every time David looked back, only one thought echoed through his mind. How didn't I see this coming? The painful truth is that most people don't. When wealth declines slowly, there are no warning siren, no flashing red light. One day, you simply wake up and realize the distance between where you are and where you thought you were is far greater than you ever imagined. That night, David stayed awake for hours. For the first time in years, sleep wouldn't come. He was no longer thinking about how much money he had. He was thinking about how much time he had left if things continued this way. And for the first time since winning the lottery, a feeling returned that he thought had disappeared forever. Fear. Fear that the greatest opportunity of his life might be turning into his greatest mistake. What David still didn't know was that the real crisis hadn't even begun. After reviewing the evidence, hearing the testimony, and examining the facts of this case, the court is prepared to deliver its verdict. At first glance, this appears to be a case about a lottery ticket, about $22 million, about spending money and making financial mistakes. But this court has reached a different conclusion. The primary defendant in this case is not the lottery. It is not money. And it is not David Reynolds. The true defendant is the illusion of wealth. The illusion that tells us that once we have enough money, we no longer need to worry, that a large enough fortune can permanently eliminate financial problems. But the evidence tells a different story. When David Reynolds won $22 million, he did not become free. He simply exchanged old limitations for new ones. A bigger house, bigger expenses, a better car, higher costs, a more luxurious lifestyle, greater dependence on maintaining it. Every decision seemed reasonable. Every purchase could be justified. Every expense had an explanation. And that is precisely the danger. Financial collapse is rarely the result of one foolish decision. More often, it is the result of hundreds of reasonable decisions that slowly combine into a disaster. This court also finds that David's greatest mistake was not spending money. His greatest mistake was believing that wealth was permanent. He planned for the best possible outcome, but he never prepared for the worst. He assumed opportunities would always exist, that investments would always grow, that people would always keep their promises, that circumstances would always remain favorable. Life offers none of those guarantees. One mistake, one recession, one crisis, one bad decision, or simply the passage of time. Sometimes that is all it takes. Therefore, in the case of David Reynolds versus financial reality, this court finds the illusion of wealth guilty. Guilty of creating a false sense of security. Guilty of hiding real costs behind an attractive lifestyle. And guilty of convincing millions of people that looking wealthy is the same as being wealthy. However, this court finds that there was another victim in this case. Not David, not his family, but the dream itself. The belief that one life-changing event can solve financial problems forever. Because the truth is much simpler. Real wealth is not what you acquire. Real wealth is what you can preserve. This court has reached its verdict. Court is adjourned. Every case that enters this courtroom should teach us something. And if the case of David Reynolds leaves us with only one lesson, it is this. Income is not wealth. Wealth is not what enters your bank account. Wealth is what remains years later. Many people spend their entire life focused on increasing their income, yet spend very little time protecting what they already have. And that difference often determines a person's financial future. Lesson 2. Every new expense creates a new obligation. A larger house is not just a house. A more expensive car is not just a car. A luxury lifestyle is not just a collection of purchases. Each one commits a future version of yourself to higher costs. Before making any major purchase, ask a simple question. If my income were cut in half tomorrow, could I still comfortably afford this decision? If the answer is no, the purchase may not be as safe as it appears. Lesson 3. Never build your financial security around the best-case scenario. Financial plans should be designed for difficult times, not easy ones. Anyone can feel like a genius during good times. Real financial strength is revealed during a crisis. That is why truly wealthy people often spend less time thinking about making money and more time thinking about preserving flexibility. They leave room for the unexpected, for recessions, for mistakes, for illness, for the days when life refuses to follow the plan. And the final lesson, never confuse looking wealthy with being wealthy. Many people see the successful lifestyle. They see the house, the car, the vacations, but they never see the bills behind them. They never see the financial obligations, and they rarely see the most valuable asset of all, financial freedom. Because in the end, financial freedom is worth more than any luxury purchase. The case of David Reynolds was never really about money. It was about choices, and perhaps about the choices we are making today. The case of David Reynolds is now closed, but the truth is, this story was never just about David. Because every day, in another home, another city, and another life, a similar case is quietly taking shape. A small decision, a seemingly harmless expense, an opportunity that looks too good to pass up, or a dream that slowly transforms into a costly obligation. And just like David, many people don't recognize what's happening until it's too late. But the purpose of Money Court is not to judge people. The purpose of this courtroom is to judge decisions, because sometimes a single decision made today can shape your financial future for the next 10 years. Tomorrow, another case will arrive on this bench, another family, another decision, and another lesson written in dollars, mistakes, and the realities of life. If this case changed the way you think about money, success, and financial security, join us before the next verdict is delivered. Judge Ledger looks directly into the camera. Until then, protect what you've built. And remember, real wealth is not what people see. Real wealth is what remains when times get difficult. I'm Judge Ledger, and you've been in Money Court.